Hello again, everybody. Let me say right off the top that this video is meant to be watched after you have done the discussion about the Pokemon essay. So if you have not posted in that discussion, I think your post is due there on Wednesday, I believe. If you haven't posted there yet, don't watch this video. Go back, look at that essay, post in that discussion, and then you can come here. Okay, of course, all of you absolutely did that. Aren't just gonna watch this anyway. Because I kind of wanted to wrap up more of the Pokemon discussion here than to start it. I would like to start it in our discussion thread and then have this be sort of a recap. And of course, I'm going to respond to any specific things that you bring up in the thread in the discussion thread that maybe I'm not going to address here. But I just wanted to kind of get a sense out there of what I wanted you to take away from this. I think this is kind of a fun essay. I think it's provocative. I usually have students disagree about this. I think a lot of students don't like the idea that that Pokemon sends the message that animal captivity is okay. But okay, so the reason that I want to look at this is not because I am very concerned with you accepting this argument about Pokemon, but more because I think this is a good example of what a literary analysis essay is. The question, kind of, for this week is what is literary analysis? And I'm kind of taking these first few weeks because obviously we haven't read any stories yet, and I'm not giving you any for homework yet. Next week we'll probably read our first one. But basically, I really think that it's kind of necessary to do like a little crash course just in kind of these like larger questions of like what is this kind of essay? Why do we write this essay? Why should we care about it? I feel like we have to answer some of those questions before we really get into it. So that's the reason I picked this, is because I think whether you disagree or agree with this essay, I definitely don't think this is perfect by any means. I don't think this is even a particularly great essay. I mean, it's fine. But more than anything, I think it shows us what a literary analysis essay should do. It does the most fundamental thing, which, like I said in another video I recorded this week, is to make an argument about the message the story sends. So, for instance, we see here, I think I have the thesis here of this essay. I just want to read that right in the first paragraph, the second to last sentence. This author writes, oh, and this was written by a student, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that, but this is a student essay from a couple years ago now. So I think the thesis here says these Pokemon are a resemblance of real-life animals, and I guess the show sends the message that animal captivity is okay. So they use the term sends a message, probably because I was repeating that over and over again, like I'm doing now. But there's ways to write this without using that phrase specifically, but I think it does help them to be very clear about what they're trying to say. They're making an argument, right? They're not just summarizing Pokemon. They're not just telling you what happens. They're making an argument that here's like the takeaway that it has for a viewer. Okay, so I want to look at some of their evidence to see how they back this up. Because like I was saying in the other video, what's going to determine whether how like good your interpretation is how much evidence you have to back it up. So what evidence do they have here? There's the one thing in the second paragraph, they talk about how like the training of the Pokemon and fighting of them reminds me of dog fighting, they say. And I think that is kind of the fundamental like metaphor or analogy here. Is that like they're arguing that Pokemon are like a symbol, I guess, or a metaphor or something, that Pokemon are related to real animals, right? Thus, Pokemon battles are related to like dog fighting or cockfighting or something like that, right? Some kind of thing of having animals fight each other, And I think, if you accept that kind of basic structure, I think what they're saying makes sense. And I know this is the part of video where you're going to say, it's just a show. They're Pokemon. They're not animals. It's not even real. It's just made up. I know you guys are going to say that. Everyone says that. And my response to that would be, of course, Pokemon are not real. They're not showing us real animals. But to suggest that Pokemon do not function in a similar way to animals just seems incorrect to me, Like, most of them are based on animals. Like, Squirtle, he's just a turtle with powers. He's a magical turtle. That's all he is. Most of them are based on animals, number one. Some of them are like trees or whatever, sure. But the way that they act, right? in terms of, you know, they can't speak to humans. Humans take care of them. They keep them as pets, more or less. Fighting them as is done with animals. I think it's I guess you could say it's on a metaphorical level, right? That Pokemon are kind of a metaphor for animals, and that way the Pokemon battle is a metaphor for the dog fight or something like that. That's kind of the maybe the most fundamental part of this argument, and I kind of find that convincing. I have to say that I do find that a little bit convincing. Uh, there's another part where they say, or I think they're quoting like PETA or something, which is, you know, so you can see how kind of how we incorporate sources as well. It's another thing this essay does. And I'm not saying that, you know, they did this like the best job you could possibly do of this, but you can see how they bring in an outside source to help their argument. That's going to be another thing that we're going to try to do. So, for instance, they have a quote from PETA on the second page that says, "The amount of time that Pokemon spend stuffed in Pokeballs is akin to how elephants are chained up in train carts waiting to be let out to perform in circuses." And you know, again, I think that the idea of the way that Pokemon are kept in a ball, similar to animals being kept in cages, I think there's something there, right? I don't think that this essay is coming, you know, totally out of left field with that. I do think there is some evidence to kind of claim that. And then, of course, we can get into the much discussed philosophical debate about what it's like inside of a Pokeball. How nice it is, in fact, how much room there is. Are they all having a big party in there? Why does Pikachu hate being in the Pokeball? That's what makes me skeptical. If the Pokeball was such a great place to be hanging out, then why would Pikachu refuse to go into one? Ever think about that? I don't know. Some other things we can think about is just like the way that the Pokemon are injured in these battles. Like some of them really get their asses kicked, right? To the point where they have to go to like the hospital or whatever. Isn't that what happens like in the video game? I guess we're thinking mostly about the show. I don't know. Maybe this is about the video game too. But in the video game, you have to take your animals to like the hospital to get them healed. You know, this essay I think opens up the question of like having animals have having Pokemon been killed in these battles. Surely there must have been the death of Pokemon. And students have told me before that I think there's at least one documented piece of evidence that like a Charmander, if its tail flame goes out, will die. So I think there's some precedent for the idea of the Pokemon being killed in this way. So that's another thing that we could think about here. One of their strongest arguments to me, and I think this might again be something that they're getting from PETA. Yeah, this is also on that second page, the second paragraph there. They say how Pokemon are not meant to be captured, but instead exist for their own reason. This is another thing that I find kind of convincing about this. The idea that the show presents kind of a human-centric view of Pokemon and hence animals, right? In this metaphorical relationship we're having there. Where Pokemon are not allowed to exist for their own reasons, right? And to me, that's always one of the more convincing kind of like animal rights arguments is that like animals don't exist to be used by humans, that they have their own kind of purposes and ends that I mean we don't understand. You know, to us it looks like they're just whatever wandering around a field or something. But you know, for them, that's fulfilling something that is kind of instinctual for them. You know, chickens have an instinct to whatever run around in a field and hang out with the other chickens. That putting them in a cage, you know, to eat them, that does not allow them to do that because we're putting our needs before like theirs, right? So I think that's another kind of convincing argument that they make that Pokemon shows where like a human centric vision. Of understanding animal life, right? Where animals are just kind of instruments for us to get what we want instead of like, again, existing on their own terms for their own reasons that maybe we don't understand. So those are some things that I do like about this essay. There are some things that I don't like. I think the thing I get the most pushback from students is about this second to last paragraph here. And I kind of like to keep this in as a little bit of a cautionary tale, you know, or like to show like what can go wrong when we start to like seriously analyze literature. Because like I said, this essay does make an argument about the message, right? It is a literary analysis essay. That's what it is. That's why I want us to look at it. But the second to last paragraph, where they start saying, you know, that it's important to see the show this way because of how it can like affect young people, right? That kids are watching this. and they say it proves. So they reference a study, right? And they say it proves that early TV viewing is strongly linked to later aggressive behavior, even when other factors such as parental neglect, neighborhood violence, and parental income was taken into consideration. And I think this is the thing that students always have a big problem with, and I sympathize. I also kind of disagree with this. I know they reference a study, and I would, be interested to see what that study actually is. But this idea that if you watch a violent show, you're going to become violent. I remember when I was a kid, it was like if you let your kids play Grand Theft Auto, they're going to turn into school shooters or robbers, or they're going to start smoking crack or whatever it was, because I'm playing the game where I can do my cheat code and spawn a helicopter and just murder everyone. And climb to the Statue of Liberty and shoot people from it. What a ridiculous game Grand Theft Auto is. But yeah, so I remember parents being like, "Oh no, we can't let our kids play this; it'll make them violent." I really cannot stress enough, I guess, how strongly I disagree with that argument and how much I don't think it's true. I think many of us know from probably, especially you guys, maybe even more than me. I think younger people nowadays, with the internet and stuff, see like probably even more violent shit than I did when I was a kid, from the video games and things I was playing. So I think a lot of us probably have personal experience where we know that there's no direct connection like that, right? I think the problem with this is that they want to view, because it is kind of a necessary thing to address. Because if we're looking for the messages that a piece of art sends, the next question is like, well, so what? Or like, what do these messages do? And we'll put off that conversation for next week. But one way that people try to answer this, I would say an incorrect way to answer this, is that people try to say, oh, well, these messages will brainwash the users, and they view this both ways, because then they look at a violent show is going to make them violent, but then they say, oh well, if we show someone a really nice show where all the characters are good and friendly, then we'll help them to grow up to be a good and friendly person. And I think we know that that's like the worst TV imaginable. That those shows that are just trying to teach you a lesson. It's just corny as hell, and nobody likes it. It doesn't work like that. Art does not brainwash people, is where I would come down on this. That it's not like what's that movie? A Clockwork Orange. I don't know if you guys have seen that. When there's the one scene where they're trying to brainwash this guy, so they like tape him to a chair and they tape his eyelids up like this, and he just has to watch all these like horrible images, and they brainwash him. That's not, I think, how TV shows and movies and poems and books. I don't think that's how they work. I don't think it makes sense to understand that as brainwashing people. I think that shows can have a message, but I think that it's up in the air whether or not the audience is going to internalize that message or be swayed by it or influenced by it. Yeah, like I think there's plenty of animal lovers who grew up watching Pokemon. So I do think this essay makes too much of this kind of direct connection between the message in a show and how it's going to affect your behavior. I really don't think that is kind of the correct way to view it. I think a better way to think about it is more like, I don't know, like reading an essay or something. Like if you read an essay that told you, it's good to beat up your parents. Beating up a mom is a good thing to do. If you read an essay that said that, I think you'd read that essay and it'd be like, beating up your parents is good. Parents discipline children, so maybe they should get beat up. And I think you'd be like, no, this is stupid. So I think if a show has a bad message, I think most viewers will see it and they'll go, oh yeah, that's dumb. So just like reading an essay about some ridiculous topic is not going to necessarily convince you. Watching a show with a certain message isn't necessarily going to make that message sink in. I do think that, now I will say this though, in defense of this, I will say that I do think that pieces of art can kind of set expectations in certain ways. One way this jumps out to me is like movies about college. Like when if you ask like high schoolers like what they imagine college is going to be like, I do think that a lot of their sort of expectations on that front come from movies and stories and things like that. So like I do think that art can like set our expectations of what life is supposed to be like or something like that. But I think that's a lot different than saying like it brainwashes you, or like I think it's more of maybe like a gentle urge. They're like, hey, maybe you should think this, and then you can be like, no, I'm not going to do that. But at the same time, like another way of thinking about this, and I'll wrap this up in a minute. But another way of thinking about this is like we can agree, as I think most of you would, that shows don't brainwash people. And for that, and for that reason, the whole idea of like canceling a show, if this essay is trying to cancel Pokemon or say we shouldn't watch it, I disagree with that. I think a show can have a bad message. You can watch the show and you can enjoy it and have fun, and then you can go, "Wow, that had a really bad message," but I still liked it. There's a lot of movies for me that are like that, where it has a bad message, but I still like it and enjoy it. So I don't think these things should be taken off the air. We need to put them in the vault or not let people watch them or whatever because it's so dangerous. But I think another thing to think about here is like the example I like to use is like these movies that like the Nazis when they were in power really tried to use film specifically to kind of do propaganda with, and they would make these stories. It'd be fiction, right? They would make a movie, a fictional movie, but they would intentionally try to put in messages that the government wanted to get out there, right? Like this was a conscious effort. Like these things I think were all sponsored by the government and stuff, but they were stories, they were fiction. But it was Nazi propaganda. That's what it was. So, like, as much as we might say that art's not going to brainwash you, if you had a younger sibling or a child or something, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to show them one of these Nazi propaganda movies, I think you probably wouldn't want them to watch that, right? Even though it wouldn't turn them into a Nazi necessarily, I think we can still be like, okay, well, that's trying to influence you. That's kind of bad. So again, there's kind of a more nuanced middle ground here, right? It's not that art brainwashes people. I think it's also not the case that art doesn't have messages, or that the messages don't matter at all. I think there's we have to find some kind of middle ground with that. So anyway, the main things I wanted to take away from this Pokemon essay, because that's where I started with this, is number one, that this is making an argument about the message the text is sending, right? And the fact that we can agree or disagree about that argument is actually a good thing. It's debatable, right? But they do back it up with evidence, though. They have evidence, and you can say that you don't find the evidence that convincing, or you have other evidence that disagrees with them, and that's fine. Because our thesis for this, it should be debatable, right? It should be possible to argue against it. So they use evidence from the text to back up their argument about the message that it sends. And that's why I really want us to read this, because that ultimately is what a literary analysis essay does. That's what we're going to be doing with our essays in this class. All right, thanks for watching. That's all for now.